The air in Graceland on August 16, 1977 was thick and heavy, not just with the humid Memphis summer, but with a deeper, unspoken weight. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, felt it pressing down on him. He sat in his quiet study, the grand house around him, a silent monument to a life lived in the blinding glare of the spotlight. Outside, the world hummed with the endless expectations of millions, but inside, a profound weariness had settled in his bones. He was tired, more tired than he'd ever been. The doctor's warnings, the whispers of his entourage, even the mirror's reflection of a man heavier, sicker than the vibrant youth who once shook the world. It all faded into a dull drone. What truly resonated was a deeper kind of exhaustion, a soul-deep ache for something he couldn't quite name, something that had slipped through his fingers years ago. The room was dimly lit, save for a single lamp on a mahogany desk. Piles of papers, half-read books, and a scattering of notes lay abandoned. His gaze wasn't on them. It was fixed on an old leather-bound address book, its cover worn smooth from years of handling. It looked out of place amidst the opulence, a humble relic from a forgotten past. His mind drifted, skipping through decades like a scratched record. He saw the roar of the crowds, the flash of cameras, the endless miles of touring. He remembered the thrill of creation, the joy of a perfect harmony, the raw energy of bringing people to their feet. But beneath the glittering surface, there was always a hum of loneliness, a quiet longing for something real, something that didn't demand a performance. Picked up the address book, its weight familiar in his hand. Pages fluttered. As he slowly thumbed through them, past names he rarely called anymore, past numbers that no longer existed. Each entry was a ghost, a flicker of a memory. Business associates, distant relatives, faded friendships, fleeting romances. None of them, he realized with a pang, held the key to the quiet peace he desperately sought. His fingers paused on a particular section, tucked away near the back, almost as if hidden on purpose. The ink here was fainter, the handwriting perhaps a younger, more hopeful version of himself. It wasn't a celebrity or a manager or a relative. Expecting something from him, it was a name that carried the faint scent of honest paper and quiet melodies, a time before Graceland became a fortress, and his life a performance. A sigh escaped him, heavy with unspoken regret and quiet yearning. He knew what he had to do. There was one call he had to make, one last bridge to a simpler time, to a feeling he hadn't known in decades. It wasn't a call for help or for comfort in the traditional sense. It was a call to connect one final time with someone who had seen him, not as the king, but as just someone who understood the music in his soul long before the world decided to crown him. Closed his eyes, picturing a dusty storefront, the smell of old pineline, and a quiet, unassuming smile. It felt like a lifetime ago, a dream he could barely grasp. But tonight, that dream felt more real, more urgent than anything else. He needed to hear that voice just once more to remind himself of the boy he used to be. The boy who simply loved to sing. The phone sat heavy on the desk. A silent black sentinel, his hand hovered over it, then pulled back. The moment felt too important to rush. He needed to gather his thoughts to prepare himself for the possibility that the person on the other end might not even remember him, or worse, might be gone. But the pull was undeniable. This call wasn't just a whim. It felt like a final, necessary act, a completion. A whispered farewell to the person he used to be, acknowledged by the only one who truly remembered. He took a slow, deep breath, the air in his lungs feeling thin. The room seemed to expand, the silence stretching out around him. Picked up the heavy receiver, his fingers tracing the cold plastic. The dial tone hummed a low, steady sound that seemed to mock the chaos of his life. He looked at the worn name in the address book again, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. It was time. The year was 1954, and Memphis was a buzzing hive of sound and heat. Beale Street pulsed with blues and rhythm, and every corner seemed to echo with the promise of something new. Elvis Presley, then just a raw, hungry kid with a guitar and a dream, knew every dusty street and every forgotten alley. He spent his days driving trucks, but his nights were for music, for haunting the small clubs and record stores, searching for inspiration, for a place to belong. One of his favorite haunts was a little hole in the wall place, on a quiet side street, far from the neon glare of downtown. It was called the Killing Sanctuary, a name that always made him smile. It wasn't fancy. The paint peeled, the wooden floorboards creaked underfoot, and the air was perpetually thick with the scent of old paper dust, and something indefinably musical. But for Elvis, it was a haven. The owner was a woman named Mae Peterson. She wasn't loud or flashy, like some of the characters he met on Beale. Lily was quiet, almost shy, with gentle eyes that seemed to hold a vast understanding of the world. Her dark hair was often pulled back in a simple braid, and she usually wore practical faded dresses. She was probably only a few years older than him, but she carried herself with an ancient wisdom. Lily loved music, truly loved it. Not just the popular hits, but the deep cuts, the obscure bluesmen, the forgotten gospel singers, the soulful country ballads. She stalked records that no one else did. Treasures for those who knew how to look. And she always had time to talk about music. Elvis would wander in sometimes after a long shift, sometimes just to escape the heat. He'd spend hours flipping through the bins, his fingers tracing the album covers, his mind absorbing the sounds that drifted from Lily's old phonograph behind the counter. He didn't have much money, so he often left empty-handed, but he never felt unwelcome. Lily would often look up from her worn ledger, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Find anything that speaks to your soul today, Elvis?" she'd ask, her voice soft and melodious, like a lullaby. He'd grin, a flash of the charming smile that would soon captivate millions. "Always, Lily, you got more soul in these dusty old crates than a whole church full of preachers." They'd talk for a long time then. Not about his truck driving, or his meager earnings, or his growing ambition. They talked about music, about the way a guitar could weep, about the power of a gospel choir, about the raw honesty of the blues. Lily would often pull out a record, sometimes one he'd never heard of, and just play it for him. "Listen to that bass line, Elvis," she'd say, her eyes closed, swaying slightly. "That's joy, pure and simple." Or, "Hear the ache in that voice, that's truth." She saw him, truly saw him. Not as a future star, not as a kid with an unusual hairstyle, but as a young man deeply connected to the rhythm and blues of the world. She never asked him for an autograph, never tried to push him to buy anything. She just offered a quiet space, a shared love for sound, and a genuine ear. One afternoon, Elvis was feeling particularly discouraged. He'd been turned down by another record label. Another club owner had told him his music was too different. He walked into the Killing Sanctuary, slumped against a bin of forgotten 78s, and just stared at the floor. Lily, ever observant, didn't pry. She simply put on a record, an old Big Mama Thornton track, Hound Dog. The raw power of Big Mama's voice filled the small store, reverberating off the walls. Elvis listened, really listened, to the defiant snarl, the unbridled energy. When the song finished, Lily quietly turned down the volume. "You know, Elvis," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "music isn't about what people expect to hear. It's about what you need to say, and what Big Mama says, well, it needs to be heard." He looked up at her, really seeing her. Her words weren't a pep talk. They resonated deep within him, reminding him why he was doing this in the first place. Not for fame, not for money, but for the visceral need to express the music that pulsed in his veins. That day, he walked out of the Killing Sanctuary with no new records, but with a renewed sense of purpose. Mae Peterson, with her quiet wisdom and her endless love for the raw heart of music, had given him something far more valuable than any record deal. She had given him back his belief in himself, and he would never forget it. The whirlwind began swiftly. One day, Elvis was just a kid haunting record stores. The next, he was on the radio, then television, then the entire world seemed to explode around him. Transformation was dizzying, electrifying, and utterly overwhelming. The small, quiet life he'd known vanished in a blaze of flashing lights and screaming fans. But even as Elvis Presley became the king, a legend in the making, a part of him still yearned for the simplicity of those early days. The Kimling Sanctuary and Lily Mae Peterson remained a quiet anchor in his increasingly tumultuous life. At first, he tried to visit the store, as he used to. He'd slip in, usually in a disguise of some kind, a hat pulled low, dark glasses. Lily, however, always knew it was him. Her quiet smile would be his only greeting, a knowing glimmer in her eyes that said, "I see you, Elvis, not the king." She never acknowledged his fame directly, never asked for favors, or tried to get closer to the inner circle. She simply treated him the same way she always had, as a fellow music lover, a kindred spirit. They'd still talk about records, about the soul of a song, about the stories hidden within melodies. These brief, stolen moments in her dusty, unassuming store became a precious escape from the suffocating demands of his new reality. He remembered one particularly chaotic day in 1956. He was promoting his first album, and the pressure was immense. Every move was scrutinized, every word twisted. He felt like a caged animal, constantly performing, even off stage. He craved solitude, a moment of genuine connection. He managed to shake off his handlers for a short while, pulling a borrowed beat-up car from a friend's garage. He drove to the Kimling Sanctuary, parking a few blocks away and walking the rest of the distance head down, trying to be invisible. When he entered, the familiar scent of old pylon washed over him like a balm. Lily looked up from behind the counter, her expression serene as always. She didn't gasp, didn't ask what he was doing there. She just offered a faint, comforting smile. "Rough day, huh?" she murmured, her voice empathetic. Elvis just nodded, unable to speak, feeling a lump in his throat. He just wanted to be still, to breathe. Lily didn't say anything else. She simply went to an old, worn armchair, tucked away in a corner, a chair he often used to sit in, and gently cleared a stack of magazines from it. "Sid," she said, "I'll put on something quiet." She went to the record player and carefully selected a Pingogue. It wasn't rock and roll, it was gospel. Mahalia Jackson, singing "How I Got Over." Powerful, soulful voice filled the small space, raw and pure, speaking of perseverance and faith. Elvis sank into the armchair, closing his eyes. The music washed over him, cleansing, soothing. He felt the tension in his shoulders ease, the frantic hum in his mind quiet down. Lily continued her work, dusting shelves, arranging records, but her presence was a silent comfort. She didn't try to fix him or give advice. She just offered him a sanctuary, a moment to simply be. When the record finished, Lily quietly turned it over, putting on another gospel track. Then, without a word, she appeared at his side with a steaming mug in her hand. "Hot tea," she said softly. "You look like you could use some warmth." Took the mug, his fingers wrapping around the ceramic, feeling the heat seep into his cold hands. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a fan, not a stranger, but a true friend. Someone who saw past the fame to the quiet, often overwhelmed young man underneath. "Thanks, Lily," he mumbled, his voice thick with emotion. "You always know what I need." She just smiled, a gentle, knowing curve of her lips. "We all need a little quiet sometimes, Elvis. And a little good music." He stayed there for another hour, simply listening, simply breathing. It was one of the most genuinely peaceful hours he'd had since his life had become a circus. When he finally left, he felt lighter, more centered. The world outside was still chaotic, but he felt a little more prepared to face it. As the years went on, his visits became less frequent, then almost non-existent. The demands on his time, the security concerns, the sheer impossibility of escaping the spotlight made it harder and harder. The memory of Lily and the Kimling Sanctuary remained a precious, secret part of him. Quiet reminder of where he came from, and who he truly was before the world decided who he had to be. Back in the hushed study of Graceland, on that sweltering August night in 1977, Elvis's fingers finally settled on a specific entry in the old address book. The page was brittle, almost translucent, and the ink was faded to a whisper. Lily Mae Peterson, the Kimling Sanctuary. Below it, an old 7-digit phone number, probably long out of use. He wondered if the store was even still. Why this call? Why now, after all these years? Was it fair to disturb her peace? He, Elvis, was a wreck. He wasn't the vibrant young man she remembered. He was a shadow of his former self, plagued by illness and the suffocating weight of fame. What could he possibly say to her? He ran a hand over his tired face. It wasn't about what he could say. It was about what she represented. Lily was the unseen thread, the quiet connection to the purest part of him. She had known him when he was just a kid with big dreams and an even bigger love for music. She had seen his anxieties, his insecurities, his moments of quiet despair. And she had offered solace without judgment. In a world that constantly demanded a performance, Lily had offered authenticity. She saw the soul in his music, not the dollar signs. She saw the human behind the legend, not the myth. And tonight, more than ever, he needed to touch that authenticity, that purity, one last time. He needed to remember the boy who loved to sing, not the man who was forced to. He remembered a moment, years ago, when he'd first started making real money. He'd wanted to buy Lily a new state-of-the-art sound system for her store, or perhaps pay for a renovation. He'd sent his assistant to discreetly offer it, but Lily had gently, firmly declined. She sent a message back, simple and clear. "Tell Mr. Presley, I appreciate the thought, but the Kimling Sanctuary is just fine as it is. Its value isn't in its newness, but in its history and its heart." While others clamored for gifts, for attention, for a piece of him, Lily had wanted nothing but for things to remain as they were, honest and true. She didn't want his money, she wanted his respect, his simple presence. And in return, she offered him a rare gift, the space to just be. That's why he had to call. He wasn't seeking anything tangible. He needed to hear a voice that remembered the pure potential, the simple joy before the machinery of fame grounded down. He needed to be reminded of the essence of Elvis, the one Lily had always seen. He picked up the heavy black receiver. His thumb hovered over the rotary dial, the numbers on the address book page blurry from age and his own fatigue. He pushed through his hesitation, his fingers moving slowly, deliberately, punching in the old 7-digit. Each click, each whir of the dial felt like a journey. Back in time, the line began to ring. 1, 2, 3. Each ring echoed in the quiet room, sounding impossibly loud in the stillness. What if she wasn't there? What if the number was disconnected? What if she had moved on, forgotten him, or worse, passed away? The thought sent a jolt of cold fear through him. Disconnection, this final attempt to bridge the chasm of time, felt fragile, desperately important. He squeezed his eyes shut, picturing her face, the gentle smile, the knowing eyes. He just wanted to hear her voice, just one more time, to hear that quiet calm that had always steadied him. To hear someone call him Elvis, not with a shout of adoration or a demand for attention, but with the quiet understanding of a long-lost friend. The phone rang again, 4, 5, 6 times. Hope began to dwindle, replaced by a dull ache of disappointment. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe some connections were meant to remain in the past, untouched by the present's harsh realities. He was about to hang up, to retreat into the lonely comfort of Graceland, when suddenly the ringing stopped. There was a faint click, a rustle, and then a soft, hesitant breath on the other end of the line. He held his breath, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm in his chest. It was real. Someone was there. The unseen thread was about to be tightened for one last precious moment. In a quiet apartment, above a modest, slightly faded storefront in downtown Memphis, Lily Mae Peterson stirred. The ringing of the old rotary phone on her bedside table was an unusual sound at this late hour. She rarely received calls after dark, and certainly not from numbers she didn't recognize. She squinted at the glowing numbers on the clock. 3 a.m. Who in the world? She reached for the phone, her hand fumbling slightly in the darkness. Her small apartment, sparsely furnished, but impeccably neat, reflected the life she led. Simple, quiet, centered around her lifelong passion. Music. Below her, the Kimhang sanctuary sat silent and dark, its shelves brimming with the stories of 1,000 songs. Business hadn't been booming for years. With the rise of tapes and then CDs and now talk of digital music, her little store felt like a relic. She often wondered how much longer she could keep it going. The thought weighed heavily on her spirit. "Hello," she answered, her voice a little raspy from sleep, laced with a hint of weariness. There was a pause on the other end. A moment of profound silence, so deep it felt almost tangible. Lily thought for a second that perhaps it was a wrong number or a prank call, and was about to hang up. Then a voice, deep and resonant, yet oddly fragile, broke the silence. "Lily, is that really you?" Lily froze that voice. It was unmistakable even after all these years, even filtered through the static of an old phone line. It was a voice that had once filled stadiums, that had moved millions, a voice etched into the very fabric of American culture. But beneath the familiar baritone there was a vulnerability she hadn't heard since he was just a hopeful, uncertain young man. Her mind reeled. Elvis? It couldn't be. Why would he be calling her in the middle of the night? After all this time, her heart began to pound, a frantic drum against her ribs. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "It's Lily. Who is this?" Even though she knew a part of her needed to hear him say it. To confirm this impossible connection, another pause. This one shorter, filled with what sounded like a deep, shaky breath. "It's Elvis, Lily. Elvis Presley." The name hung in the air, a phantom limb of a past life. Lily closed her eyes, a rush of memories flooding her mind. The dusty store, the smell of old records, a young man with fire in his eyes and music in his soul, slouched in her worn armchair, talking about his dreams. She remembered his hunger, his shyness, his unshakable love for the raw, authentic sound. She opened her eyes, staring at the dim ceiling. It was really him, the king himself, calling her Lily Mae Peterson, a quiet woman, running a struggling record store. It felt more real. Like a dream. "Elvis." She repeated, the name tasting foreign on her tongue after so many years of only hearing it shouted from headlines or whispered in awe. There was no fangirl giddiness in her voice, only a quiet astonishment mixed with a deep, unexpected surge of sadness. She knew just from the sound of his voice that something was profoundly wrong. This wasn't a casual call. "I hope I didn't wake you," he said, his voice softer now, almost apologetic. "I know it's late. I had to call." Lily pulled herself up, sitting on the edge of her bed. "No, Elvis, you didn't wake me. I was just thinking." She paused, searching for the right words. "It's been a long time." "Too long," he agreed, and in that simple admission she heard the weight of all the years that had passed, all the experiences that had separated them, all the unspoken burdens he carried. The awkwardness was there, a thin veil between them, but beneath it, an undeniable current of something deeper, something unbreakable. It was the recognition of two souls who had once found common ground in the quiet reverence for music, and who now, against all odds, were reaching for it again. The initial shock settled into a quiet hum of disbelief and wonder. Lily clutched the phone, her knuckles white. Elvis Presley was on the other end of the line, and he sounded tired. Not the vibrant, powerful voice that belted out hits, but a subdued, almost fragile tone. "How are you, Lily?" he asked, his voice soft. almost a whisper. "How's the store?" It wasn't a question about fame or fortune or the latest scandal. It was about her, about the little corner of the world she inhabited, the place that had once been his refuge, and that more than anything brought a lump to her throat. I'm well enough, Elvis," she replied, honestly. "The store's still here barely sometimes. People don't buy records like they used to." She heard a soft sigh from his end. "Yeah, I know. Things change," he murmured. "But some things should stay the same." His voice held a wistful quality that she recognized from his younger days, a longing for permanence in a world of constant motion. There was a comfortable silence then, not awkward, but filled with the unspoken weight of years and memories. Lily felt an unexpected warmth spreading through her chest. It was strange talking to him like this, as if no time had passed at all, as if he were still that young man with the guitar, seeking out forgotten blues. "Do you remember that old blues album, Lily?" he asked, breaking the silence, his voice a little stronger now, tinged with a flicker of his old enthusiasm. "The one with the scratch on Sugar Mama Blue? You swore it added character." Lily laughed, a soft, almost forgotten sound. "Oh, I remember that one. Lightnin' Hopkins. You listened to that record so many times. I thought you'd wear it out. You said it reminded you of the crickets back in Tupelo." "It did," he exclaimed, and she could almost hear the smile in his voice. "That scratch was like a little piece of home. You always had a way of finding the good in the imperfections, Lily, in the music, and well in everything." He paused again, and she imagined him back in Graceland, perhaps sitting in a quiet room, bathed in shadows. "Remember that rainy afternoon, Lily? It was pouring outside, and the power flickered in the store. We just sat there in the near dark listening to an old gospel choir on that battery-powered radio you had. You hummed along." Lily closed her eyes, the memory vivid. "I do remember. You said you felt closer to God in that little store than you did in any big church. You said the music just settled your soul." "It did," he confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "It always did. You never knew how much those moments meant, Lily, just quiet and real, without an agenda. It was a small thing, that memory, a simple, forgotten afternooning for him. It wasn't about the grand concerts, the adoring crowds, or the millions of records sold. It was about a shared moment of simple beauty stripped bare of all the fanfare. This was the heartwarming part, the core of their unspoken connection. He was reaching back for that pure source, for the time when music was just music, and he was just Elvis. "I guess I always tried to keep it real here, Elvis," Lily said, her voice soft, filled with a quiet pride. "Music's too important for anything else." "It is," he agreed, his voice almost reverent. "It truly is, and you understood that, Lily, always." The silence returned, but this time it was filled with understanding, with shared history, with a warmth that transcended the miles and the years. He wasn't asking for anything. He was simply remembering, and in doing so, he was allowing her to remember too, the boy behind the legend and the simple truth they had both once shared. The conversation deepened, shedding the last vestiges of awkwardness. It was clear that Elvis wasn't calling for superficial reasons. He was searching for something profound, something he felt only Lily could offer. "Lily," he began, his voice dropping to a low, confessional tone, "you remember how it was back then, just playing, singing, for the sheer joy of it, before it became everything else?" Lily listened, her heart aching for him. She pictured him, not as the global icon, but as the earnest young man who once poured his heart into every note, every chord. "I remember, Elvis," she said gently. "Pure passion, that's what you had." "Yeah," he sighed. "Pure passion. It feels so far away now sometimes. Like another lifetime, the business, the demands, it changes. You forget to braid you. I just miss it, you know, the feeling of really connecting with a song, not just performing it. It's like I'm lost in this giant gilded cage, and I can't find my way back to the simple melody." Lily's eyes filled with tears, Tears, she quickly blinked away. She understood. She had watched from afar as the boy she knew had been swallowed by the machine of celebrity. She had always wondered if the true music in him still survived. "The music is still there, Elvis," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "It's in you. It always was. Nobody can take that away. Not the crowds, not the contracts, not even the years. But I can't hear it sometimes, Lily," he admitted, a raw vulnerability in his voice that was startling. "It's drowned out by the noise of everything," he continued, his voice filled with a profound weariness. "I get tired, so tired of being the king, of never being alone, of everyone wanting a piece of me, the real me, the one you knew. He's been buried under, all of it." "He's not buried, Elvis," Lily countered softly. "He's just quiet. He's waiting for you to remember him, and you always did love to sing, truly sing, when no one was watching." He chuckled, then a faint sad sound. "You always had a way of cutting through the nonsense, Lily. Remember that time I was all puffed up after my first big show? I came into your store talking about her. Mae. Did you feel the music, Elvis? Or just the noise?" "I remember," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "You looked like a popped balloon. You always were. You never let me forget what truly mattered. You never treated me like I was special. You treated me like I was just a human being who loved music, and that meant everything." He spoke of the quiet moments. He missed the freedom of anonymity, the simple joy of discovering a new song. He confessed his loneliness, his fear that he had lost himself along the way. He didn't complain about his wealth or fame, but about the profound isolation that came with it. I needed to hear your voice, Lily," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. To remind me of who I was before all of this, before I forgot myself." Lily listened, letting his words wash over her. She felt honored deeply so that he had chosen her for this final raw confession. He wasn't the untouchable superstar. He was just a man adrift and searching for a beacon in the dark. And she, Lily Mae Peterson, with her struggling record store and her simple life, was that beacon. She was the keeper of his forgotten truth. The silence on the line after Elvis's confession was different now. Not awkward, but heavy with shared emotion. Lily took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. She knew she couldn't offer him a cure for his burdens, but she could offer him something real, affirmation. "Elvis," she began, her voice steady and clear, "you never forgot yourself entirely. You might have gotten lost in the noise, but the music never left you. It's woven into your very being, every note you created. It came from you, the real you." "But I don't feel it anymore, Lily," he said, the raw ache back in his voice. "Not like I used to. It's just a job now, a performance, and I'm tired of performing." "That's because you're looking outside for it, Elvis," Lily gently countered. "The music isn't in the stadiums or the record sales or the adoration where it always was. It's the part of you that connected with that old blues record that felt the spirit and gospel. That's the real Elvis, the one who just wanted to sing." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "And that Elvis, the one who loved music for its own sake, he's still a good soul. You always were. You had a kind heart, even when you were just starting out. Even when you were scared and unsure. That's what mattered, Elvis. Not the fame, not the money, but the heart you put into everything, into every song." Lily could almost hear him processing her words, letting them sink in, then a soft, almost imperceptible sigh. "You always saw that, didn't you, Lily? You saw the me underneath all the flash. I just saw you, Elvis," she corrected softly. "No flash needed. And you always honored the music. That's what I saw. That's what I still see." He gave a low, shaky chuckle. "You know, when everyone else was telling me how great I was, how I was going to change the world, you were the one who always reminded me to remember where I came from, to remember the soul in the sound." "Someone had to," Lily said, a small smile on her face. "Fame is a powerful current. It can sweep you away if you don't have an anchor." "You were my anchor, Lily," he confessed, the words quiet but profound. You really were? I got so caught up I forgot to hold on to the rope. It's never too late to remember where the anchor is, Elvis, she said, her voice filled with quiet wisdom. And the good you did, the joy you brought to so many with your music. That's real, that's your legacy. Not the scandals, not the struggles, the pure, unadulterated music, and you shared that with the world. You gave so much. Lily knew he hadn't heard such simple, unvarnished truths in years. His life was filled with yes men, with people who wanted something from him. Lily wanted nothing but his peace, his understanding of himself. Thank you, Lily, he said again, the words imbued with a deeper gratitude this time. Thank you for that, for reminding me. The conversation began to wind down naturally, a sense of quiet completion settling over them. There was no need for grand pronouncements or dramatic farewells. They had said what needed to be said. Elvis had reached out, and Lily had answered, providing the solace he sought. He had found his anchor, even if for just a fleeting moment he had found the simple truth he'd been searching for. The pre-dawn light was just beginning to paint the edges of the Memphis sky in soft hues of gray and rose when the conversation finally began to draw to a close. Quiet understanding passed between them. A recognition that the purpose of the call had been fulfilled. Well, Lily, Elvis, said his voice softer now, tinged with a peaceful resignation. I really needed to talk to you tonight, more than you know. I'm glad you called, Elvis, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. She struggled to keep in check. Truly glad. It was good to hear your voice again, and to know you're still out there. A faint, almost imperceptible chuckle came from his end. Just trying to make it, Lily, just like always. Then his voice grew serious again. But you're right. About the music, about the soul. I needed to hear that. I needed to remember the boy who just loved to sing. Thank you for everything. There was a finality in his tone, a quiet acceptance that sent a shiver down Lily's spine. She felt it intuitively, that this was more than just a late-night chat. This was a closing of a circle. You always were a good soul, Elvis, Lily said, her voice barely a whisper filled with an unspoken tenderness. She didn't offer empty platitudes like, get well soon, or take care of yourself. She just affirmed who he was at his core, as she always had. She recognized the fragility in his voice, the weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. He didn't respond immediately, but she could hear him take a deep, slow breath. It sounded like the breath of someone who had finally laid down a heavy burden. Goodbye, Lily, he said, his voice gentle, laced with a profound, almost sacred quietness. Be well. Goodbye, Elvis, she whispered back, her eyes suddenly brimming with tears. And you too be at peace. The click of the phone was soft, final. Lily slowly lowered the receiver into its cradle, her hand trembling slightly. The dial tone hummed faintly for a moment before fading into silence. She sat there on the edge of her bed, the phone still warm in her hand, the quiet apartment suddenly feeling vast and empty around her. He was gone. Not just from the phone, but she felt it in her bones, in the deep silence that followed his last words. It wasn't a sense of loss, not yet, but a profound, almost spiritual sense of closure. He had sought out his truest self, acknowledged it, and then released it in Graceland. Elvis slowly placed the receiver back onto its base. The room was still dark, but a sliver of dawnlight was now visible through the heavy drapes. He didn't feel the crushing weight of loneliness anymore. He felt a quiet, profound sense of peace. He had found what he was looking for. He had connected with a part of himself that was pure, untainted by fame, acknowledged by the one person who truly understood. He stood up slowly, his movements stiff but purposeful. He walked to the window, pulling back the heavy velvet curtain just a fraction. Outside, the world was still asleep, but soon it would awaken, and with it the demands, the expectations, the endless performance. But for this moment, in the quiet solitude of his study, Elvis Presley was simply Elvis. He was the boy who loved to sing, the man who had found a quiet peace in a late-night call to a long-lost friend. He had been seen, truly seen one last time, and that he realized, was all he had ever really wanted. The morning sun, when it finally broke through the Memphis humidity, cast long, deep shadows across the grounds of Graceland. Inside, the quiet calm that had settled over Elvis Presley after his final phone call lingered. He moved slowly, deliberately, a sense of profound exhaustion still present but now tinged with a deep, private comfort. He sat on his bed looking out the window at the familiar trees, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He felt at peace, a feeling that had eluded him for so long. Conversation with Lily had been a lifeline, a final, anchoring truth. He had said what he needed to say, and he had been heard, truly heard. Hours later, the news would break. The world would erupt in shock and grief. The king was gone. But for Elvis, in those quiet pre-dawn hours, the ending had already unfolded. Not in the clamor of the world, but in the gentle resonance of a whispered farewell. Meanwhile, across town, in her small apartment above the kindling sanctuary, Lily Mae Peterson was stirring. She hadn't slept much after the call. She had simply lain awake, replaying every word, every nuance of Elvis's voice. Quiet confession, the shared memories, his desperate search for a forgotten part of himself. She felt an overwhelming mix of sadness, but also an immense honor. He had chosen her. He had called her. She got out of bed, her limbs feeling strangely light. She walked to the window and looked down at her quiet street. The kindling sanctuary, her life's work, looked small and unassuming below. For months she had been wrestling with the thought of closing it down. It was hard to compete, hard to make ends meet. But now, after the call, a renewed sense of purpose bloomed in her heart. Elvis had sought her out for authenticity, for the pure love of music that her store represented. He had remembered the peace he found there, the unvarnished truth. How could she let that go? How could she let the last bastion of true, uncommercialized music in her corner of the world fade away? No, she would keep it open. For Elvis? Yes, but also for herself and for all the others who, like him, might one day need a sanctuary. From the noise, she would continue to spin the records that held stories, that spoke to the soul, that offered solace in an increasingly chaotic world. She would keep the spirit of pure music alive. Later that day, the news hit her like a physical blow. The radio, usually tuned to a soft jazz station, suddenly blared with frantic announcements. Her phone began to ring off the hook. Friends, neighbors, even some old customers, all expressing shock and disbelief. Elvis is dead. Lily listened, tears streaming down her face, but there was a deeper understanding in her grief. She knew what those last quiet hours had been for him. He had sought peace, and she had in her small way helped him find it. He had wanted to touch the true Elvis one last time, and she had been the one to hold that space for him. The secret of that last phone call remained hers. She never spoke of it. Not to reporters who descended on Memphis, not to curious fans, not even to her closest friends. It was a sacred trust, a private connection between two souls who had found each other across the chasm of fame and time. The world mourned the king, the legend, the icon, but Lily Mae Peterson mourned the boy who loved to sing, the man who had called her in the dead of night, searching for his own reflection in the quiet authenticity she represented. She cherished the memory of his tired, honest voice, the sound of his final, grateful goodbye. And as the years passed, she continued to run the kindling sanctuary, a quiet testament to the enduring power of music and to the unseen thread that connected a king to a humble shop owner, a thread that had, in his final moments, given him true peace. The secret remained, a quiet echo in the heart of Memphis, a legacy of a soul seen and loved for exactly who he was.